Thunder!
Mario is no stranger to branching out of the platforming space. The plumber has really done it all. Partying, practicing medicine, becoming an artist, running a toy company, karting, and competing in a multitude of sports, including the Olympics with his rival. But there's one sub-series of Mario that has really made its mark among its loyal fans, the Mario RPGs. Now, I say one sub-series, but in reality, I've always seen the Mario RPG subgenre as being split into four main pillars: Super Mario RPG, Paper Mario, Mario & Luigi, and most recently, Mario plus Rabbids. Each of these are incredible in their own right, and what I'm going to do is delve into each one of these and talk about their legacy, where they are now, and where they could potentially go in the future. It seems like the Big N has been giving less than stellar attention to this style of Mario, so I want to take the time to talk about what makes these games so damn special in the first place. So, let's get started right away with the game that started it all, Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars. This is my favorite JRPG of all time, as well as being one of my favorite Mario games of all time. It's an absolute classic game that has garnered an immensely loyal following, and I want to show my appreciation for this game. If you don't know anything about this game, Mario RPG was a joint project between Nintendo and Square in an attempt to create a game that would potentially perform better in the West than Square's other projects. What better series to do that with than with Nintendo's leading man? Miyamoto himself already wanted to see his iconic plumber make his way into an RPG, but could the Mario formula truly mesh well with a JRPG? The answer was absolutely yes. Super Mario RPG took the classic Final Fantasy formula and injected it with Mario's DNA, and it worked perfectly. This was the first real time that Mario's world was expanded upon in such a meaningful way. We had an actual rich story that was supported by a cast that we'd never seen so fleshed out before. Mario had much more personality shown through his actions, and his overall heroic traits shined through more than they had ever had in prior games through the way that other characters in the world acted around him. Peach got to be more than just a damsel in distress, and it got to show that she is just as much of a hero for her kingdom as Mario is. Bowser got fleshed out more, as well as we got to see a side of the Koopa King that really made Bowser feel a lot more three-dimensional rather than just being a basic villain. And Bowser being a reluctant hero is a trait that actually ended up showing up in future Mario RPGs going forward. And then of course we got the two final party members, the original characters of Geno and Mallow, that not only have become fan favorites, but also felt perfectly at home with the rest of the Mario cast. And beyond just the characters in the world itself was rich and lively. We got to see locales and environments that had not been previously explored in Mario games, and all of these different areas had people living their day-to-day lives within them. The game had so many memorable locations like Rose Town, Booster Tower, Nimbus Land, and Smithy's Factory. Now, I know this is something that's just standard for a JRPG, but it was new for a Mario game, and it had this certain novelty to it at the time. And the gameplay was another thing that felt like the standard JRPG style, but it had certain aspects about it that became a staple for the Mario RPGs. Of course, you had to throw in a bit of platforming into the mix. It's a core part of the Mario series, but the battles are where the interesting stuff came in. Sure, you had your basic turn-based combat, just like any other RPG, but you also had the concept of timed hits, basically pressing the button at exactly the right time when executing an attack in order to deal more damage to opponents. It's a simple mechanic, and yet it's one that has remained in basically every Mario RPG going forward. So now comes the part where I talk about where the game currently stands. So while the game was a success for both Square and Nintendo, the game ended up being a one-off. It also doesn't seem to be a game that may ever get a true sequel, so for now I think it just comes down to waiting for a remaster of the game or for it to finally be re-released on NSO. Now, while Super Mario RPG didn't necessarily spawn a true sequel, it did have a spiritual successor. I'm talking about Paper Mario. The game was originally meant to be a direct sequel to Super Mario RPG, and while this didn't happen, the series still retains a lot of what made the original game so special. This series is so nostalgic to me. From the very first entry, Nintendo knocked it out of the park. Paper Mario has always had such a whimsical charm that set itself apart from anything we'd seen in Mario before. The style was quirky, the characters were unique and incredibly memorable, and the gameplay built upon the concepts started in Super Mario RPG. However, in this game, it ditched the party concept and instead opted for partners that you could swap between in battle. This put a much greater focus on Mario himself, and the partners acted almost as sidekicks to Mario, providing basic attacks in battle, but also helping Mario in unique ways in the overworld. Nintendo had a hit on their hands. Paper Mario 64 was an amazing first entry to start the series, and The Thousand Year Door is still seen by many as one of the greatest games Nintendo's ever made. These were incredibly polished RPGs that not only stood out amongst Mario games, but RPGs in general. This series once again combined turn-based RPG mechanics with a lot of Mario platforming thrown into the mix that allowed for the game to still feel at home with the rest of the Super Mario series. And the whole paper aspect was immensely fun too. The first two games at least, they never leaned too much into the fact that the world was paper, but just enough to allow for some fun and interesting mechanics. Yet despite how beloved these first two entries were and still are, Nintendo sort of moved away from the fact that Paper Mario was in fact an RPG. After Thousand Year Door, we ended up getting Super Paper Mario on the Wii, which, while still one of my favorite Mario games, deviated so much from what the Paper Mario series started out as. And when the series did try to come back to its RPG roots with Sticker Star, something felt off. Sticker Star was a horrible entry that leaned way too heavily into gimmicks that felt too forced for the series, and unfortunately, while Color Splash and Origami King were still better entries in the series, the gimmicky nature still remained, and it feels like the RPG element of Paper Mario has taken a backseat to the whole paper aesthetic. Even though Paper Mario seemingly abandoned its RPG roots after Thousand Year Door, yet another Mario RPG successor would come in to take its place. Mario and Luigi. Seen by many players as sort of the core Mario RPG series. Starting out with Superstar Saga on the Game Boy Advance, Mario and Luigi sort of took over the mantle for being the main RPG series after Paper Mario Thousand Year Door. What's interesting is that this series would be made by a studio made up of former Square devs. Yep, Alpha Dream. The studio behind the Mario & Luigi series was founded by multiple ex-Square developers, including the man who directed the original Super Mario RPG, Chihiro Fujioka. Because of this, much of the original game's charm can be found in Mario & Luigi. In fact, the composer for Super Mario RPG, Yoko Shimomura, would return to compose music for this series as well. So it sort of feels like the Mario RPGs came full circle. But make no mistake, Mario & Luigi definitely sets itself apart from its predecessors. Sure, you had the story-driven plot, the quirky locales and characters, but the core gameplay was much different than what had come before. Rather than having a party-based system, or even the partners from Paper Mario, the game focused on its two titular characters, Mario and Luigi. This would be seen in the way that they interacted with the overworld as well as in battle. The series' core theme was about synergy between the two brothers. One could not truly act without the other, which is seen to be especially true in the game's Bros attacks. These were special attacks in battle that would have you taking control of both brothers in tandem in order to execute moves to their full potential. This was the series' bread and butter. Now, throughout the other entries in the series, there would still be new gimmicks introduced, of course, such as the Baby Bros and Partners in Time, controlling Bowser for sections in Inside Story, or even the addition of a third bro in the form of Paper Mario in the series' final original entry. And yeah, you heard that right. The final entry. All the way back in 2015. That was when we got our last original Mario & Luigi game. It's interesting to see this series fall from grace. The first three entries were incredible games, but once the series made the jump to the 3DS, the next two games were still okay, but they proved not to live up to the success of their predecessors. Nonetheless, it's still incredibly sad to see what happened to Alpha Dream. I had hoped that when Nintendo released the Switch, maybe the series would see new life breathed into it. However, this ended up not being the case. Even after the Switch had been released, the final two entries in the Mario & Luigi series ended up being remakes, one of Superstar Saga, which sorta made sense, but then one of Bowser's Inside Story, a game that was still playable on the 3DS. Now, I don't know the inner workings of game development, but I still find it bizarre that Nintendo would have remakes of two beloved games only to keep them on a system that was on its way out. Perhaps this was meant to keep people attached to the 3DS a bit longer, who really knows. In the end though, it doesn't really matter since the series may never see the light of day again. Alpha Dream filed bankruptcy in 2019, and while Nintendo still owns Mario & Luigi, of course, I highly doubt that we will ever see the series return, at least in the form that we all know and love. The only recent acknowledgement of the series has been in the form of Superstar Saga coming to the NSO. It's cool, but it also stings knowing that we may never get a new entry. So far, this video probably feels like doom and gloom, talking about how all these series have seemingly met their end over the years. But fear not, there is still one series that seems to be thriving, Mario plus Rabbids. Now this series is different because not only is it made by Ubisoft, but it's also a completely different style of RPG than the other games. Mario plus Rabbids is instead a turn-based tactics game, but it still oozes so much of the same charm. This unlikely collaboration between Ubisoft and Nintendo proved to be a surprise hit. It retains a lot of the charm from the other Mario RPGs, while also becoming far more quirky and off the wall thanks to the Rabbids inclusion. The first entry, Kingdom Battle, was an incredibly enjoyable experience. It was a pretty straightforward tactics game that merged the Mario and Rabbids series perfectly. The game was full of a ton of humor and memorable battles. It proved to be a success for the studio as well, so naturally it got greenlit for a sequel. And let me tell you, Sparks of Hope expanded upon what was already good about the first game and made it absolutely amazing. Gameplay was expanded upon, more Mario characters were introduced, the Rabbids gained more unique personality and character depth, the world was much more lively, and the story gained so much more depth. Rather than playing it safe, the sequel got even more experimental than the first, and it proved itself to be a worthy sequel. Not to mention, Sparks of Hope still has a good amount of DLC coming out, so we will more than likely see this level of quality continue on into that as well. The series works so well because not only does the studio have a passion and understanding of the Mario series, but they're doing something experimental and new with the Mario IP that allows it to feel fresh and exciting. If Ubisoft and Nintendo's relationship remains in good standing, I can see Mario plus Rabbids having a very bright future. Now that we've gone over all of the various Mario RPGs, where do I think that the sub-series stands? So, like I said before, I think that Mario plus Rabbids is safe. The fact that it's developed by a third party is a plus, seeing as it doesn't divert resources away from Nintendo. It's also removed enough from the other RPGs that I don't really see it competing with other RPGs Nintendo may make for Mario in the future. So then, what exactly does that future hold? So, for Paper Mario, I genuinely do not believe that we will ever see a return to form, especially after Origami King. Nintendo even classifies it as an action-adventure game now rather than an RPG, so while Paper Mario is still a fun series, I think it's going to keep going down the more experimental path that it's on. Then for Super Mario RPG. This one's interesting because it really depends on if Square comes back for either a remaster or a sequel. The game's original director has said on record that he wants his final game to be a sequel to Mario RPG, so maybe it will come to fruition someday, but either way, I think this once again really depends on if Square wants to come back and make another one. And finally, Mario and Luigi. The series is in a really weird spot right now. With Alpha Dream being dissolved, it's hard to see the series ever returning, yet at the same time, this feels like the most safe series to continue if Nintendo ever wants to make more Mario RPGs down the line. At any rate, I at least want to see remasters or proper ports of the series to modern Nintendo hardware. So my final thought is, while I don't think that Mario RPGs are dead by any means, it's just a matter of Nintendo figuring out which direction they want to take Mario in. I know many fans would love to see a proper Mario RPG return, so hopefully we see that from Nintendo in the future. But for now, I think that's enough out of me. If you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Later.